When billionaire Richard Hale rushed to the hospital to see his sick mother, he expected heartbreak, but not the sight of his fiancée's hands around his mother's throat. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more powerful emotional stories that touch the heart. The city lights of Seattle flickered beneath Richard Hale's glass office window, a skyline he had built his empire upon. 42 years old, calm, composed, and powerful, he was the kind of man who rarely lost control of anything. But that night, control slipped through his fingers. The phone on his mahogany desk rang once, then twice. He frowned. Only one person ever called this late. "Mr. Hale?" came the trembling voice of his mother's caregiver. "It's your mom. She's been rushed to St. Luke's Hospital. It's a stroke. You need to come now." For a moment, time stopped. His breath caught in his throat. His pen dropped from his hand, clattering against the floor. He whispered, "I'll be right there." Within seconds, he was gone, the office still glowing behind him as his car sliced through the midnight rain. His mind replayed fragments of his last conversation with his mother, her soft laughter over breakfast, her gentle reminder that love mattered more than work. And of course, Melissa's voice echoed too, his fiancée, beautiful, ambitious, and always perfectly poised. She had said earlier that week, "Your mother is holding you back, Richard. You'll never grow if you keep letting her control you." He had brushed it off, thinking it was just jealousy, the kind couples could work through. Now, racing through slick streets under flashing red lights, her words felt heavier. He dialed her number. "Melissa? Mom's had a stroke. I'm heading to St. Luke's." There was a pause, long enough to notice. "Oh, Richard. That's terrible. I'll meet you there soon, all right?" He could tell she was distracted, maybe half asleep, maybe not alone. But he didn't care. All he wanted was to hold his mother's hand again. St. Luke's smelled like bleach and broken hope. The automatic doors whooshed open, releasing a gust of cold air as Richard entered. Nurses moved briskly through the halls, their sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. He walked up to the reception desk. "Margaret Hale, stroke unit." The nurse pointed down the corridor. "Room 309, sir." He nodded and started walking. His heart pounded in rhythm with the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. He hated hospitals. His father had died in one. He never thought he'd be back here for his mother. As he approached room 309, he slowed. The sound of voices floated through the door, one calm and weak, another sharp, low, almost venomous. He froze. That second voice was Melissa's. "You just won't stop meddling, will you?" she hissed softly. "You've had him wrapped around your frail fingers for years. But not anymore, Margaret. Not anymore." Richard's pulse spiked. He inched closer, the door half open. Through the crack, he could see the dim glow of the bedside monitor blinking beside his mother's sleeping form. Melissa stood near the bed, her long hair cascading over her shoulder, her designer coat draped carelessly on the chair. Her face twisted with anger as she leaned over Margaret's fragile body. For a moment, Richard thought he was imagining it. Then horror struck him like lightning. Melissa's hands, perfectly manicured, pale against the hospital sheets, were on his mother's throat. Margaret's eyes fluttered open, panicked, her weak arms trembling. Melissa leaned closer, whispering, "You should have let go when you had the chance." For a split second, Richard forgot how to breathe. His vision blurred with disbelief and fury. Then instinct took over. "Get away from her!" He shoved the door open so hard it slammed against the wall. Melissa spun around, gasping, her face draining of color. Margaret coughed weakly, clutching her throat, eyes wide in terror. "Richard," she stammered, I was just—" She couldn't breathe. "I was adjusting the—" He didn't hear her. He was already beside his mother, pressing the emergency button, his heart pounding louder than everything else. Within seconds, 2 nurses and a security guard rushed in. "Sir, what happened?" He pointed at Melissa, his voice breaking for the first time in years. "She tried to kill my mother." Melissa's mouth fell open. "That's ridiculous! She was choking. I was helping." But her tremor in her voice betrayed her. The nurses ushered Melissa out as Richard clung to his mother's frail hand, his whole body shaking. Margaret managed a whisper, her voice raspy and cracked. "I tried to tell you. She wasn't who she seemed." Tears burned behind his eyes. "I know, Mom. I know now." Minutes later, the hallway was quiet again. The door closed behind the nurses, and Richard sank into the chair beside her. His phone buzzed with missed calls, reporters, business partners, friends, but he didn't answer any of them. He stared at the floor, the sterile tiles blurring as memories replayed like cruel film reels. Melissa's laughter, her fake promises, her hand on his mother's throat. How could he have been so blind? Outside, the rain kept falling, tapping against the window like an old clock counting down the death of illusions. As dawn began to paint the horizon pink, Richard finally looked up and whispered to himself, "This ends tonight." He didn't know it yet, but that night wouldn't just end his engagement. It would begin the most unexpected chapter of his life. If you walked in and saw the person you loved trying to harm your family, what would you do? Confront them or walk away forever? The hallway outside room 309 was a storm of whispers and flashing lights. Security officers spoke in low, urgent tones, while nurses moved quickly between stations. Richard stood frozen beside the wall, still clutching his mother's chart, his heartbeat pounding so hard it felt like thunder in his chest. Through the narrow glass window of the door, he could see his mother resting now, her breathing shallow but steady. Oxygen hissed softly from the machine beside her bed. That sound should have calmed him. It didn't. He'd replayed what he saw 100 times already. Melissa's fingers, her whisper, that cold flash of hatred in her eyes. It hadn't been confusion. It hadn't been mercy. It had been rage, real, ugly rage. "Sir?" a security guard approached. "We need your statement." Richard nodded numbly, words catching in his throat. "She was choking my mother. I saw it with my own eyes." The guard scribbled notes on a pad, the pen scratching loudly against paper. "And this woman, Melissa Grant, correct? Is she family?" "She was my fiancée. Not anymore." The guard exchanged a look with one of the nurses, that subtle sympathetic glance people give when they realize money doesn't buy immunity from heartbreak. "We'll need to contact the police, sir. They'll take it from here. Do whatever you need. Just make sure my mother's safe." Minutes later, Melissa reappeared, escorted by 2 hospital security officers. Her face was pale, her lipstick smudged, her hair slightly disheveled. Even now, she tried to look composed, chin raised, eyes narrowed like the victim in her own performance. "Richard," she began, voice trembling with rehearsed innocence, "this is all a misunderstanding. I swear I wasn't trying to hurt her." He stepped forward, fury barely contained. "I saw you, Melissa. Don't you dare lie to me." "I wasn't lying," she shot back, her voice cracking. "She started choking. I panicked. I didn't know what to do." "Don't," Richard said, his tone low and final. "Don't insult me with that." The guards looked uneasy. One gently gestured toward the exit. "Miss, we need to step outside." As they guided her down the hallway, she turned her head, her voice sharp as a knife. "You think you can ruin me? You'll regret this, Richard. You'll regret choosing her over me." Her echo lingered even after she was gone. He stood there for a long moment, shoulders rigid, jaw clenched. Regret? No, what he felt wasn't regret. It was awakening. The mask had finally fallen off, and the woman he thought he loved had vanished beneath the truth. Hours passed in a blur. Police officers arrived, took statements, reviewed security footage, and quietly thanked him for his cooperation. Richard sat beside his mother's bed long after everyone left. The monitors beeped softly, the room washed in blue light from the window. He held her hand gently, tracing the lines of her wrinkled skin. "I should have seen it. All those little signs, the way she looked at you, the things she said about family." Margaret stirred slightly, her lips moving faintly. "Don't blame yourself," she breathed. "Some people hide their hearts too well." Her voice cracked, and he squeezed her hand. "Rest, Mom. I'm not going anywhere." By morning, reporters had gotten wind of the scene. Word traveled fast when your last name carried billions. Richard's phone exploded with missed calls and headlines that made him sick. Seattle billionaire's fiancée removed from the hospital in assault investigation. Trouble in paradise, Hale family scandal at St. Luke's. He silenced all of it. The hospital cafeteria was nearly empty when he finally went downstairs for coffee. His tie was gone, his eyes sunken from lack of sleep. The woman behind the counter, a kind-faced nurse named Clara Benson, handed him a cup with a warm smile. "Long night?" she asked gently. He hesitated, surprised by her kindness. "Something like that." She nodded toward his trembling hands. "Sometimes coffee helps the body, not the heart. You need both." That simple kindness almost broke him. "My mother's upstairs. Someone tried to hurt her." Clara's smile faded. "I'm sorry. I'll say a prayer for her." Richard met her gaze, soft, genuine, the opposite of Melissa's cold beauty. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means more than you know." Back upstairs, a detective waited for him, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a badge that gleamed under the fluorescent light. "Mr. Hale," the detective said, "we've reviewed the footage. You were right to call it in. It shows your fiancée leaning over your mother's bed for about 30 seconds before you entered. We can't see her hands clearly, but your testimony aligns with the nurse's initial statement." "What happens now?" Richard asked. "She'll be questioned, possibly charged. It's serious, sir. You might want to prepare for a media storm." Richard exhaled slowly. "I've survived worse storms. Just make sure my mother never sees her again." The detective nodded. "We'll handle it." That night, the city outside shimmered beneath the rain again, but inside room 309, the air felt different. Still heavy, but not hopeless. Richard stood by the window, watching the reflections of hospital lights blur across the glass. Behind him, his mother slept peacefully at last. For the first time in hours, he closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you, God, for letting me get here in time." Then softly, he added, "And forgive me for not seeing her sooner, for mistaking love for convenience." He looked once more at his mother, frail yet alive, and though his heart was shattered, a quiet strength began to return. Because sometimes the moment you lose everything false is the same moment you begin to find what's real. If you discovered someone you loved had a hidden darkness, would you expose them or walk away and let karma take care of it? The next morning, the rain over Seattle slowed to a drizzle. The gray clouds hung low over the hospital, reflecting the heaviness in Richard's chest. The headlines hadn't stopped. Neither had the phone calls from his PR team or the board members worried about optics. But none of that mattered to him. His only concern lay in room 309, asleep beneath soft white sheets. Margaret Hale was stable. The doctors said her oxygen levels had improved overnight. The bruises along her neck were faint now, but they told a story he would never forget. He sat in the small hospital chapel for a while, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly. The stained glass windows cast faded colors on the floor. "I've built companies from nothing," he murmured, voice breaking. "But I couldn't even see the truth about someone I shared my life with." A voice answered softly from behind him. "That's because love makes us believe the best in people. It's not weakness, Mr. Hale. It's being human." He turned. Clara stood at the doorway, still in her pale blue scrubs, a clipboard pucked under her arm. She gave him that same gentle smile she had yesterday, the kind that felt more like understanding than sympathy. Richard stood and nodded. "You don't have to call me Mr. Hale. Richard's fine." "Then you don't have to call me Nurse Benson," she said lightly. "Clara's fine." For the first time in days, a corner of his mouth twitched, a hint of a smile. "Fair enough." They walked together toward the cafeteria. The place was quiet at that hour, save for the hum of the vending machines. Clara poured him coffee, black and strong, and leaned against the counter as he sat. "You don't look like a man who sleeps much," she observed. "I don't," Richard admitted. "Sleep feels expensive when guilt is free." She tilted her head. "You did the right thing. You stopped her. That's what matters." Richard's eyes dropped to his hands. "Maybe. But I brought her into my mother's life. I made her believe Melissa loved her. And that mistake almost—" He trailed off, unable to say the word. Clara stepped closer, her tone warm but steady. "Do you know how many people in this hospital wish they had someone show up for them like you did? You may have misjudged love, but you didn't fail compassion." He looked up, studying her face. No pity, just calm conviction. It disarmed him. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked quietly. 13 years, she replied. "Long enough to know that money and misery often share the same room." Her words hit deeper than she knew. By afternoon, Richard walked back to his mother's room. Margaret was awake, a little pale but smiling faintly when she saw him. "You look tired, honey. Sit down before you fall." He sat beside her, taking her hand. "How are you feeling, Mom?" "Like I wrestled with a ghost," she whispered. "But I'm here, thanks to you." Her voice was frail, but her spirit wasn't. Margaret Hale had been through enough battles in her life to know when to forgive, but this one she struggled with. "Son," she murmured, eyes glistening, "don't carry her sin on your back. Some people were raised on bitterness, not love." Richard's jaw tightened. "I won't forgive her, Mom. Not for this." "Then forgive yourself instead. That's where healing starts." He didn't answer. He couldn't. The words lingered long after she closed her eyes to rest. That evening, as Richard was about to leave, Clara caught up with him near the elevator. "Your mother asked for warm tea before bed," she said. "I brought it in earlier. She said you make it better." "You told her that?" he asked, surprised. She smiled. "She said you used to make it for her when you were a kid. Chamomile with too much honey." He chuckled softly, a sound that felt almost foreign. "She still remembers that, huh?" "She remembers everything about you," Clara said. Then, gently, "You've got a good mother, and she's got a son who still shows up when it counts. That's rare." As the elevator doors opened, Richard turned to her. "You're kind, Clara. Most people look at me and see the money first." She met his gaze evenly. "That's because they're looking for what they can take. I look for what's left behind." The doors slid shut before he could respond, leaving him with her words echoing in his mind. Later that night, alone in his penthouse, the silence pressed against him. He walked past the grand piano Melissa had begged him to buy, untouched, like so much else she'd wanted. He opened the bar cabinet, hesitated, then closed it again. He didn't need numbness. He needed truth. In the reflection of the window, he saw himself, a man stripped of pretense. The billionaire, the fiancé, the headline, all gone. Just a son, grateful his mother was alive. He whispered, "You almost lost her because you were too busy building an empire." The words hurt because they were true. Outside, the city lights flickered. Somewhere between guilt and relief, Richard felt something shift, a small, quiet determination rising in his chest. He wasn't going to let darkness define the rest of his story. Have you ever learned the hard way that real love sees beyond wealth and promises? Tell me, would you forgive or would you walk away forever?
The following morning, the hospital was quieter. Too quiet. Richard arrived early, carrying his mother's favorite breakfast from the bakery across the street, oat muffins and fresh orange juice. But as soon as he reached her room, something felt off. Two nurses stood outside whispering. One of them looked up nervously when she saw him. "Is everything okay?" he asked. The younger nurse hesitated, glancing at the floor. "Your mother's fine, sir. She's resting. But someone's here to see you. Downstairs." "Who?" he asked warily. "She said her name's Melissa." For a moment, time froze. He almost laughed at the absurdity of it, the audacity that she'd show up again after everything. But curiosity, that dangerous human instinct, pulled him downward through the sterile hallways until he reached the hospital's side garden. There she was, Melissa Grant, immaculate as ever, even with the faintest bruise of exhaustion under her eyes. Dressed in a beige coat, pearls still around her neck, pretending she was the same woman who'd nearly ended a frail woman's life. "What are you doing here?" Richard demanded, his voice low and sharp. She turned slowly, feigning composure. "I came to explain. You won't answer my calls. You won't let me speak." "There's nothing left to explain." Her jaw clenched. "Please, just hear me out." He sighed, crossing his arms. "You've got 2 minutes." Melissa's eyes glistened, part guilt, part manipulation. "I snapped, Richard," she began. "I was angry. Your mother, she never liked me. She made me feel small every time I was near her, always reminding me I wasn't good enough, that I didn't belong in your world." "She was protecting me," he shot back. "She saw something I didn't." Her lip trembled. "You think I wanted to hurt her? I didn't. I just lost control for a moment." He shook his head. "Lost control doesn't mean wrapping your hands around someone's throat, Melissa." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't understand. I was scared, not of her, of losing you." "Then you shouldn't have tried to kill the one person who taught me how to love." That silenced her. For the first time, the mask cracked completely. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. I didn't mean it, Richard. I just—" She choked back a sob. "I grew up fighting for everything. My father left us. My mother blamed me for that. When I met you, I thought I finally found safety. But then your mom looked at me like I was trash, and I snapped." Her pain was real, but it came too late. "You're not the only one who grew up broken," Richard said quietly, "but you don't heal by breaking someone else." She covered her face with trembling hands. "So that's it? You're just done with me?" "I was done the moment I saw you for who you are." He turned to leave, but her next words stopped him cold. "She's the reason my baby died." Richard froze mid-step. Slowly, he turned. "What did you just say?" Melissa's face contorted with bitterness. 2 years ago, before you proposed, I was pregnant. Your mother told me I wasn't fit to carry a Hale. She made me feel like garbage. I lost the baby the next week." He stared at her, every muscle in his body rigid. "And you blamed her for that." She nodded slowly. "I told myself I forgave her, But I didn't. When I saw her lying there, weak, helpless, something in me wanted her to feel what I felt. Her confession hung in the air like smoke. Richard took a long breath, fighting the war in his chest between anger and something else, something closer to sorrow. "I'm sorry for your loss, Melissa," he said finally, voice low. "But what you did isn't grief. It's cruelty." "I loved you," she whispered desperately, "more than anyone ever will." "No," he said softly. "You loved control. You loved what being with me gave you. And when that power slipped away, you tried to take something sacred instead." Her tears streamed down her face now. "Please, Richard, I can't lose you. Don't let it end like this." It already ended, and maybe it needed to. He walked away. The garden silence pressed around him as his footsteps echoed against the pavement. Behind him, Melissa fell to her knees, her sobs swallowed by the hum of the hospital air vents. Inside, Clara saw him coming down the hall. His eyes looked different now, emptier, but lighter somehow, like a man who had finally set a burden down. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. Instead, she handed him a fresh cup of coffee and said, "You look like you've made peace with something." "I think I just closed a chapter I should have ended a long time ago," he replied. Clara smiled gently. "Then maybe now you can start writing a better one." That night, as the rain whispered against the windows, Richard sat beside his mother again. She was awake, reading a small prayer book. "Mom," he said quietly, "she came today." Margaret didn't look up. "I know. I saw her leave." "I didn't want her near you," he murmured. "She needed to say her piece. I may not forgive her, but I can still pray for her." Richard nodded slowly, understanding at last the difference between forgiveness and freedom. One healed the other. He took her hand gently. "You've always been stronger than me." She smiled faintly. "No, son. You just had to remember where your strength comes from." A week later, the sky over Seattle finally cleared. The rain had stopped, the hospital's courtyard glistened beneath the pale morning sun, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Margaret Hale was smiling again. Her son stood by the window, hands in his pockets, dressed in a soft gray sweater instead of his usual tailored suit. "You look human again," she teased, her voice still hoarse but light. He smiled faintly. "Guess that's progress." "Clara told me you haven't left the hospital much," Margaret said. "You should take her to lunch, you know." Richard raised an eyebrow. "You're matchmaking now." "She's been kind to you. And to me. Kindness deserves company," she said, then added slyly, "Besides, I see the way you look at her." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You see everything, don't you?" "Mother's intuition," she replied, eyes twinkling. Later that afternoon, Richard finally took her advice. He found Clara in the hospital garden, reading from a small paperback on her lunch break. The breeze lifted her chestnut hair slightly as she looked up, surprised to see him. "Well," she said, closing the book, "look who decided to step outside." He smiled. "Guilty. My mother says I owe you lunch." "Oh, does she now? I didn't realize I took bribes from patients' families," she teased. "Then consider it gratitude, and maybe an apology for bringing chaos into your hospital." Her eyes softened. "Richard, you didn't bring chaos. You brought truth. Sometimes that's what healing looks like." They walked together to a small cafe across the street, a quiet place that smelled of cinnamon and roasted beans. No paparazzi, no board members, no luxury cars. Just two people learning how to breathe again. Over coffee and soup, the conversation turned easy. Clara told him about her two kids, teenagers she was raising alone since her husband's passing 5 years earlier. She spoke with humility and humor, without the bitterness he'd come to expect from hardship. "You've been through so much," he said quietly, "and yet you still find light in everything." She smiled, "Because I learned long ago that life's too short to hold on to darkness. You either let it go, or it eats you alive." Richard stared at her for a moment, her words echoing like a balm. He realized then that he wasn't just sitting with a nurse. He was sitting with wisdom. Days turned to weeks. Margaret was soon discharged from the hospital, stronger with each passing day. Richard hired private caretakers, but Clara continued the visit, not as a nurse anymore, but as a friend. One afternoon, while the two women laughed over tea in the garden, Richard joined them, watching the way his mother's face lit up when Clara entered the room. It felt right. Margaret looked between them knowingly. "Clara, did I tell you Richard once burned down my kitchen trying to make pancakes?" Clara laughed, a rich, warm sound. "Now that I'd pay to see." "Oh, it was spectacular," she grinned. "Smoke everywhere, fire alarms blaring, neighbors calling 911. "Oh, groan. "You're never letting that go, are you?" "Not as long as I'm breathing," she replied. It was a small, ordinary moment, yet somehow it carried more joy than any gala or business victory he'd ever experienced. He wasn't the billionaire anymore. He was just a man, surrounded by laughter and light. But one evening, as he sat by his mother's bedside at home, a letter arrived. The handwriting was unmistakable. Melissa Grant. He stared at it for a long time before finally opening it. "Richard, I don't expect forgiveness. I only want you to know that I'm leaving Seattle. I'm getting help. Real help. I've lost everything, but maybe that's what I needed to see what I became. Tell your mother I'm sorry. Melissa." He folded the letter slowly, exhaling a deep breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. For the first time, he felt no anger, only release. When he looked up, Clara was standing at the doorway, holding a tray with tea. She noticed the paper in his hand and the faraway look in his eyes. "Bad news?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "Closure." She nodded knowingly. "Those are the best kind of endings." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his chest softened. Maybe his mother had been right all along. Kindness did deserve company. A month later, Margaret insisted they host a small gathering. Not a lavish party, but a quiet dinner at home. The dining room was filled with soft music, candlelight, and laughter. Clara and her kids joined them, bringing homemade pie that filled the house with the scent of cinnamon. At the end of the night, as they stood by the balcony watching the city lights twinkle below, Richard whispered, "You know, I thought my life ended that day in the hospital." Clara glanced at him. "And now? Now, I think it began there." She smiled, slipping her hand into his. "Sometimes God breaks us open just enough to let the light in." I nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "Then I guess I should be grateful for the storm." Margaret watched them from the doorway, a content smile on her face. Her son had finally learned what she'd prayed for all along. That love built on humility and kindness outlasts the kind built on fear and pride. The night ended quietly. No cameras, no reporters, just hearts mended and stories rewritten. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come in the form of revenge or justice. It comes in the quiet realization that peace is the truest form of wealth. If life ever shattered your trust but gave you a second chance through kindness, would you take it? Tell me below, do you believe broken hearts can truly heal? Every story reminds us that truth always finds light and kindness always wins. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments below and subscribe for more unforgettable stories of love, betrayal, and redemption.